My dear, can I tell you where I live? Between your silence and the ache you never noticed. I live in the pause before you lie. I live inside the memories you buried, screaming. I live where your fingers used to hold me gently. I live in your breath, right before you say her name. I live behind your smile, where I used to matter. I live inside your apology that never came. I live in the text you typed, then deleted. I live in the sound of your footsteps walking away. I live in the questions you avoid asking. I live inside the night you regret the most. I live in your eyes, but only when you're broken. I live where you left me, between almost and never. I live in the guilt you don't talk about. I live in the voice you use with everyone but me. I live in the sentence you never finished. I live where your love turned into strategy. I live in the pain that makes you flinch. I live beneath the mask you wear for her. I live in the ache you blame on everything but me. I live where your shadow touches my dreams. I live in the wish you never admit aloud. I live inside the perfume you pretend not to miss. I live in the joke you use to hide the truth. I live in the silence after my name is spoken. I live in your pulse when you remember me. I live where your loyalty cracked. I live in the mirror you can't face at night. I live in the warmth you forget you crave. I live in the bed you made without love. I live in the part of you you thought was dead. I live in the moment your soul blinked. I live in the kiss you gave to numb yourself. I live inside the lie that felt safest. I live in the truth you tried to outrun. I live in the version of you before you became cold. I live in the line between love and survival. I live where your hands ache with regret. I live in the dream you still hide. I live in the heartbreak you kept holy. I live between your prayers and your pride. I live in the echo of your first goodbye. I live in the sigh before you say, I'm fine. I live where your anger disguises your grief. I live in the silence after forever. I live in the chill you feel when you see my name. I live in the truth you wish wasn't real. I live in the softness you buried to survive. I live where your soul curled into itself. I live in the shadow of your wedding vows. I live inside the version of us that still exists in dreams. I live in your throat when you swallow my name. I live in the pulse between her laugh and your guilt. I live in the fear that I was right. I live where the lie got comfortable. I live in the memory you flinch from. I live where love was once enough. I live in the regret you mistake for nostalgia. I live in your goodbye disguised as silence. I live in the choice you made in panic. I live in the feeling you can't name. I live in the apology you only whisper. I live where the truth made you flinch. I live in the touch you still crave. I live in the heart you pretend is healed. I live in your breath when you miss me. I live in the word almost. I live in the heartbeat you ignore. I live in the part of you that never left me. I live in your silence, louder than screaming. I live in your dreams, not your days. I live where you'd rather forget. I live in the apology you owe yourself. I live in the eyes that once knew me. I live in your resistance to softness. I live in the pause before you speak truth. I live where love became a weapon. I live in the story you rewrite. I live in the ache you mistake for anger. If this touched your soul, don't scroll, like, comment your favorite quote, and subscribe for more. I live in your silence, louder than thunder. I live in the goodbye you meant, but didn't say. I live where you still search for me unknowingly. I live in the pause between her voice and your heart. I live in the scar you show no one. I live in your memory, unloved but unforgettable. I live in the room you enter only in dreams. I live in the forgiveness you can't give. I live where you remember me and wince. I live inside you, quiet but never gone. I live in the part of your story you skip. I live in the craving you misplace. I live in the ache that isn't hunger. I live in the storm you thought you'd weathered. I live in the poem you can't finish. I live where your truth cracked your voice. I live in the stillness after the storm. I live in the places you dare not look. I live in your soul, waiting to be chosen. I live in the version of you I still pray for.